part of winter, not just any winter, but the kind that makes the bones scream, where breath freezes before it leaves your lips and snow falls sideways, furious and endless. Manhattan lay blanketed beneath a suffocating silence, its streets covered in ghostly white. Taxi lights blinked like fireflies lost in fog. The rich had disappeared into their high-rises and penthouses, the glass of their windows glowing with warmth like unreachable stars. But below, in the forgotten underworld of alleyways and subway grates, the cold had teeth. And it bit. One man sat beneath the skeletal frame of an abandoned newsstand. His coat was too thin, his gloves fingerless, and his boots had holes that swallowed snow like a grave. His name was Jonah, 47, clean for 3 years, forgotten for 10. His breath rattled in his chest with every exhale. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and his body had started to move slower, like it was trying to shut down, one limb at a time. He didn't sleep much anymore. The cold made it dangerous, especially when it dropped below 0. Hypothermia didn't. Tap you on the shoulder. It crept in slowly, numbing your legs first, then your hands, until it slipped over your heart like a sheet of ice. Jonah had watched others go that way. Quietly, without a scream. He had one blanket, one broken thermos, one photograph of his daughter from 10 years ago, crinkled and water-stained but carefully folded into his shirt pocket. She didn't know where he was. He didn't want her to. And then, it happened. In the early morning haze, when the snow had slowed to a whisper and the city held its breath between one storm and the next, Jonah saw something that didn't belong in the gutter. Wallet, black leather, too clean, too expensive, sitting half submerged in slush at the edge of the curb. At first he thought it was a mirage, a cruel trick of the light. But as he shuffled closer, the truth hit him in a rush of adrenaline. This was no ordinary wallet. The stitching alone looked like it cost more than his entire wardrobe. Carefully, gently, he picked it up, brushing away clumps of snow with numb fingers. Inside, a heavy money clip with thick, crisp bills, hundreds, at least 20, maybe more. Platinum and titanium cards, one engraved in silver, Cole D. Rembrandt. He had seen that name before, in magazines, on Forbes covers, the tech billionaire, the youngest CEO to take a startup to $1 trillion valuation before turning 40, owner of Rembrandt Systems. Jonah's hands trembled, his stomach twisted. It would have been so easy, so incredibly easy to take the money. No one would know, no cameras down here, just shadows and trash bags and old regrets. But Jonah had made a promise to himself when he got sober. The world may have forgotten him, but he wouldn't forget who he was. Not again. Not for money. He zipped the wallet into his inner jacket, pocket close to his chest, and started walking. The snow was thick, and the city was half shut down. But Jonah walked for nearly 4 miles, past blocks where the skyscrapers stabbed into the gray sky like ancient gods, past stores he used to walk into without thinking, and now couldn't even look through without remembering what he'd lost. Before. We go deeper. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching this from. I read every single one. I feel every one. By the time he reached the Rembrandt building, his legs were soaked and shaking. His socks felt like wet paper. He barely managed to pull the wallet from his jacket as he approached the security booth. The guard looked at him like he was a ghost. "You can't be here." "I think this belongs to Mr. Rembrandt," Jonah rasped. He held out the wallet like it was radioactive. The guard hesitated, took it, flipped it open. His eyes changed. His tone changed. He stepped away and made a call. Jonah stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, shivering uncontrollably. After a minute, the guard returned. "You can go now." That was it. No thanks, no handshake, no warm coat, just the door closing behind him, sealing the heat away like heaven refusing entry. Jonah turned back into the snow. He didn't expect anything, never had. He walked until his legs gave out and collapsed. Behind a dumpster behind a shuttered dry cleaner. He closed his eyes, letting the cold crawl back in. But when he woke up, he wasn't behind a dumpster. He wasn't outside. He wasn't even in a shelter. He was in a bedroom. A real bedroom. Cream-colored walls. Hardwood floors that shone like new copper. A fireplace. A roaring fire. He gasped and sat up so fast he nearly fell from the bed. A bed with feather pillows and sheets that smelled like lavender. And there, on the nightstand, was a folded note written in neat black ink. Jonah, it's yours now. Cole, he blinked, shook his head, read it again. Then he saw the papers beside the note. Legal documents, property deed, keys, and a valuation, $5.4 million. Jonah stood up like the floor might disappear beneath him. He stepped barefoot across the polished wood toward the giant window at the end of the room, pulled open the drapes. A skyline. The skyline. Central Park glittering below. He wasn't dreaming. He had returned a wallet and woken up in a home he could never have even walked past without being stopped. But it wasn't the house that changed him. It was the next knock at the door. The light in the room was golden, not the sterile white of subway platforms or the dim flicker of shelter fluorescents, but golden, warm, alive. Morning light poured through massive windows like liquid honey, softening the crisp lines of the luxury suite. The silence was total, yet not empty. It was full of peace, of possibility, of a strange and terrifying newness. Jonah stood in the center of the room barefoot, the polished oak floor cool beneath his feet, his body half clothed in a robe so soft it felt like he was being held. He turned in place slowly, his eyes moving. Across the fireplace mantel, the elegant sconces on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stocked with real books, hardcovers, gold-lettered spines. He walked past a glass decanter sitting on a silver tray. There was water inside, clean and clear, beside two crystal glasses. No dust, no mess. It was like this place had waited for him, and that note, the one he found folded on the nightstand, just an hour before. It sat in his robe pocket now, burning through the cloth with a presence larger than any letter he'd ever read. Yours now. Cole. Jonah whispered it under his breath again, as if trying to summon the voice behind it, trying to confirm it wasn't something his mind made up after a night of frostbite-induced hallucinations. But the home was real. The note was real. The legal packet? All real. Bound papers with words he didn't fully understand, but the signatures and official seals screamed authenticity. A $5.4 million brownstone, registered under the Jonah Mercer Living Trust. With maintenance and property taxes prepaid for 10 years, he tried to sit down, but he couldn't. His legs wouldn't let him. Not from fatigue, from shock. This kind of thing didn't happen. Not to people like him. Not after the life he'd led. It felt too big to hold. Then came the knock, one soft rap. Then two more, spaced evenly. Jonah nearly jumped out of his skin. He hesitated, walked slowly to the grand double doors that led to the front entry hall. There was a camera beside the door, a black lens glowing with a subtle blue ring. And a voice. Mr. Mercer? Good morning. I hope we're not intruding. Mr. Rembrandt asked us to make sure you're settled in properly. Jonah reached forward and opened the door slowly. Outside stood a woman in a gray pantsuit, her red hair tied back in a perfect braid, and beside her, a tall man in a navy overcoat with a leather folder under one arm. I'm Calla. This is Vincent. We're your liaisons from Rembrandt Holdings. Mr. Rembrandt prefers discretion, but he insisted we offer you anything you need in the coming weeks. Food, wardrobe, medical, mental health, employment services, education, legal. Jonah blinked. I don't, he stammered. I didn't ask for. Calla smiled gently. You didn't need to, Mr. Mercer. You already did everything right. He let them in, dazed. They walked him through the house, the 4 floors, the master bath with marble fixtures, the kitchen, outfitted with appliances Jonah couldn't even name, the basement level with a laundry room larger than any bedroom he'd had, the private rooftop garden covered in a thin film of snow, already melting in the morning sun. They handed him a phone, already programmed with emergency numbers, contacts, a food ordering service, and a direct line to a concierge team hired specifically for him. He stood there, gripping the phone like it might vanish. Why? He asked finally. Why me? Calla didn't flinch. Because in a city of 8 million people, you did what maybe 10 would have done. You returned something valuable, without asking, without waiting for applause. Mr. Rembrandt? Well, he doesn't forget things like that. Jonah stared out at the skyline, a lump rising in his throat. I was just trying to do the right thing. Vincent stepped forward. And now you've been given a chance most people never get. Not charity, not pity, a clean slate. The next few days unfolded like a dream he couldn't wake up from. A tailor came to fit him with 3 suits and 6 casual outfits. None flashy, all quietly elegant. They took him to a barber who trimmed his hair with care, not judgment. His beard, his eyebrows, shaped back into the man he remembered from years ago, but sharper, stronger. His teeth, chipped and stained from years without a dentist, were cleaned and whitened by a private dental service paid for in full. A therapist came every afternoon just to talk, not to lecture, just talk. He sat in the garden one evening with a cup of mint tea. The air smelled of melting ice and wood smoke. For the first time in years, the silence around him felt safe. It no longer threatened to consume him. And then, on the 7th morning, the letter came. It was delivered in a white envelope, slid under his door. No name, just a monogram. CR inside was a single page, handwritten. Time, for the first time in years, had stopped being something Jonah feared. It no longer chased him like a wolf, gnashing its teeth with every hour he lost to hunger, cold, or survival. In the weeks that followed his miraculous awakening inside, the Upper East Side brownstone, a place he never would have dared walk past, let alone enter, Jonah began to feel a rhythm return to his life. A slow, cautious cadence, like the early beats of a healing heart. But nothing, not even the stunning luxury he now lived in, could erase where he had come from. And every morning, Jonah woke early, before the sun, before the city stirred, and sat on the rooftop garden in a coat far too nice for the snow that still lingered in shaded corners. He would sip his tea and stare across the city skyline and remember 5 winters sleeping on concrete. 1 wallet returned, and now, this. But the house, the suits, the tailored meals, and the handwritten note from a billionaire, none of it sat as heavily in his soul as the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the haunting kind, the unfinished kind. He had not told anyone, not Calla, not Vincent, not the therapist who visited weekly, not even the stranger in the park he sometimes sat next to in the late afternoons, the man who fed pigeons with cracked palms and always shared his half sandwich without saying a word. Jonah had not told anyone about her. Her name was Riley, his daughter. She would be 21 now. He hadn't seen her since she was 11. She had long brown hair, thick like her mother's, and freckles across her nose that multiplied when she laughed. The last time they'd spoken was in the cafeteria of the courthouse after his parental rights had been severed. Not because he was abusive, not because he didn't love her, but because he'd lost his home. And in the system's eyes, that meant he wasn't safe. She had cried. She had begged. And Jonah had said nothing because he didn't want her to carry the weight of his shame. He had walked out of her life that day like a ghost and had not dared to haunt it since. But now he had a home. Now he had a name again. Now he had dignity, resources, and something resembling a future. And still, fear. Because what if she had forgotten him? What if she hated him? He had the means to reach her now, to hire investigators, to send a letter, to call. But every time he picked up the phone, his hand trembled. And so, day after day, he waited, haunted by memories that played like films in a loop behind his eyes, until one morning, when everything changed again. He was in the kitchen, flipping through a newspaper, the real kind, with ink that smudged your fingers and stories you could fold under your arm, when the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. He walked barefoot across the floor. These days, he almost enjoyed the feel of wood under skin, and opened the door to find a courier in a gray parka holding a package, small and square, wrapped in thick brown paper. There was no label, just a seal embossed into the paper with a strange mark, a compass, pointing due north, circled by the letters C.R. Cole Rembrandt. The billionaire. Jonah hadn't seen him. Not once, not even during the transfer of the house. The man remained a myth, a whisper of wealth and brilliance moving in boardrooms and cloud servers, never needing to appear in person. But now he'd sensed something. And Jonah, with fingers that shook more from awe than fear, unwrapped the paper and opened the small wooden box within. Inside, a phone, a black matte smartphone, sleeker than any he'd ever seen. Already powered on, the screen glowed with a message in bold white text. 10 a.m. Answer. Che looked at the kitchen clock. 9:58. He sat down, stared at it. The phone rang. No name. Just private call. He answered. There was a pause. And then, Jonah Mercer, came a voice. Deep, calm, polished like marble under rain. I hope you're comfortable. Jonah's throat dried. I am. Yes, I've watched you, the voice continued. Don't take that the wrong way. I don't mean like a voyeur. I mean as someone who's studied human nature longer than I've studied technology. I gave you a house, a name back. But what you've done since, that's yours. Entirely. Jonah didn't speak. He listened, heart in his throat. I saw the classes you signed up for, the library card, the shelter donations, the shoes you left in bags under bridges downtown. A pause. I saw you walk back into the world, Jonah exhaled. Why me? There was a smile in the man's silence. Because integrity matters. And people like you, Jonah, are rare. But I didn't call to flatter you. I called with an offer. Jonah sat up straighter. I'm building something, a program, an institution, not a company, not a brand, something real, something human. It's called the Northlight Project, and I want you to be its soul. Jonah blinked. I don't understand. You will. A pause. In 3 hours, a car will arrive. It will take you to a campus in Hudson Valley. There you'll meet 4 people. Each one, like you, came from nothing. Each one, like you, made a choice. I've offered them the same chance I gave you, but they're not all ready. Jonah's voice was barely a whisper. And what do you want from me? I want you to be their compass. The line clicked. That afternoon, Jonah stepped into a black SUV and was driven out of the city for the first time in years. The air was cleaner upstate, the snow untouched, the trees taller, and there, nestled in a wide field surrounded by pines, stood a modern building shaped like a star, 5 wings spreading out from a glass core. Inside were 4 people waiting. A woman who had survived prison after being framed by her employer. A teenager who had escaped a trafficking ring. A refugee who had lost his family crossing the Atlantic, and a man who'd been addicted for 15 years, but saved his neighbor from a burning building with his bare hands. Jonah looked into their eyes. He saw the same flicker he used to see in mirrors, the silent scream for redemption, the fragile flicker of hope wrapped in fear. And he knew. This was no accident, no fluke, no billionaire's whim. This was the reason, that wallet, that note, that house, they were all a door. And now Jonah was stepping through it, not alone, but leading others behind him. Because sometimes one honest act can become a flame in a world of frost. And Jonah Mercer, once a man the world forgot, had just become the spark. The human heart is a quiet but stubborn thing. You can cover it in frost, bury it beneath years of sorrow and hunger, silence it with rejection, grind it beneath the indifferent heels of a rushing world. But if even a spark of dignity is left inside, it will wait. It will survive. And if given a second of sunlight, it will beat again. Jonah Mercer's heart was beating differently now, not just because he was warm for the first time in years, not because his stomach no longer roared with the rage of starvation, not because the world, for once, seemed to be holding out its hand instead of turning its back, but because, for the first time in so long, his life had meaning again. It began with the house, of course. The unimaginable gift of a brownstone in Manhattan's most sacred stretch of street, where even the air seemed to move differently. A $5.4 million miracle. But miracles are moments, and moments are fleeting. What came after the miracle, that was the real story. That was where Jonah's transformation truly began. The house was more than walls. More than a deed or a number. It was a question. Now that you've been given this, what will you do with it? Jonah could have disappeared, melted, into a quiet life of comfort. No one would have blamed him. The world had wrung him dry. It owed him peace. But something inside him, something that had slept for years, was stirring now. Something restless, determined, a purpose. And then came the phone. Unmarked, sleek, humming with quiet energy. And the voice of Cole Rembrandt. A man Jonah had never met, yet whose choices had just altered the course of his entire existence. The call wasn't long. The offer wasn't flashy. No contracts, no headlines. Just a whisper in the dark. I'm building something, and I want you to be its soul. Jonah didn't even think before he said yes, because something about the words, the Northlight Project, hit him like a chord he hadn't heard since childhood. A part of him he thought was gone forever suddenly remembered what it felt like to care about more than just surviving the night. That morning, the city faded behind him as the black SUV carried him north, through the winding arteries of New York State, past the broken edges of forgotten towns and into the heartbeat of the Hudson Valley. The air changed out there. It wasn't thick with sirens or urgency. It felt wide, old, watchful. The car pulled into a gated property 30 minutes outside. Beacon. Acres of untouched forest surrounded a clearing in the snow, and there, nestled like a secret, was the facility. 5 wings of brushed steel and glass, each stretching from a glowing central atrium like the points of a compass. Above the entrance, one word carved in stone. Northlight. He stepped out into the crunch of snow and felt for the first time in forever the possibility of belonging. Inside, everything was light, literal and figurative. Walls made of glass to prevent shadows from hiding in corners, rooms full of warmth, plants, books, laughter in the distance. It didn't feel like a facility. It felt like the future. But the people inside were not tech prodigies or elite minds. They were survivors. The first person he met was Celine. She stood at the edge of a room lined with canvases, one hand stained with blue paint. She didn't smile, just nodded. "You're the wallet guy," she said quietly. "We've been waiting for you." Celine had been framed by her hedge fund boss for embezzlement she never committed. She'd spent 3 years in prison, lost her daughter, lost her name. Now she painted walls with the colors of her grief. The second was Mateo, 17, skinny, quiet. He wore his hoodie like armor. Rescued from a trafficking ring in Queens, he hadn't spoken in 3 months until last week, when he whispered a single word during a group session. Free. Next was Rashid, a former professor from Syria. He had lost his entire family crossing the Mediterranean. In the camp where he'd been processed, he taught children math with sticks in the dirt. Cole Rembrandt found him through a story that never made it past a third-page print in an obscure global digest. And the last was Kevin, 49, a man with burn scars up one arm. He had pulled 3 people from a tenement fire he hadn't started. But because of his history with meth, no one had believed him until one of the survivors testified. He had saved lives, and still, the world kept walking. Now they sat in a circle, 5 strangers with broken paths, watching Jonah. "You returned a wallet," Kevin finally said, his voice gravel thick with loss and smoke. "I read about it, and now you live in a castle. You believe in fairy tales or something?" Jonah didn't flinch. "No, I believe in chances, rare ones, and what we do when we get them." Celine tilted her head. "So what are we supposed to do? Paint gratitude murals?" Jonah didn't answer right away. He looked out the glass wall behind them. The forest beyond was hushed, peaceful, watching. Then he said softly, "I think we're supposed to build something, not just a future for us, but for the ones still out there, still sleeping in stairwells, still being punished for choices they didn't make." Mateo looked up. His eyes were glassy. "But how?" Jonah smiled. "By remembering who we were, and teaching them that who they are is not where they've been." That was the beginning. The next weeks passed in a blur of blueprints, brainstorming, healing, and long nights full of stories. They cried together. They laughed in short, shocked bursts, like people rediscovering oxygen. They wrote a mission, statement, not for funding, for themselves. Northlight would become a sanctuary, but not one of pity. It would be built by those who had fallen through society's cracks, and who now understood those cracks better than any billionaire, any politician, any policy. They would provide housing, counseling, vocational training. But more than anything, they would provide dignity, and at the center of it all was Jonah. Not as a CEO, not as a leader perched above, but as a mirror, a reminder that the smallest act of good, returning a wallet, could birth a revolution of restoration. Rembrandt. Visited once, he didn't make a speech, didn't ask for attention. He walked the halls like a ghost, watching, listening. At the end of his visit, he handed Jonah a key. A real one. Brass. Old. "What's this?" Jonah asked. "The original front door to my family's first house," Rembrandt said. "We lost it in a fire, but I found the key in a box years later. Never knew what to do with it until now." Jonah held the key and nodded. "We'll hang it over the entrance, so they remember where the light starts." But all of it, the campus, the key, the dream, it was leading somewhere, something greater. Because Jonah hadn't yet faced the final chapter of his healing. His daughter still didn't know he was alive, and the moment he'd avoided for a decade was rushing toward him like a train he could no longer sidestep. The letter had already been written, tucked inside a sealed envelope. Sitting at the edge of his desk, 5 words on the front, "To my daughter, Riley." And when she opened it, the world would never be the same again.
The floor was concrete, bitter with the chill